Hello everybody, I am Matt McMaster, and this is the first episode of McMaster and the Mic. So McMaster and the Mic is the new Indie Media Crew sports talk show that we're doing here to produce content on the YouTube channel because we're not, announcing baseball games, because baseball, as of right now, isn't happening, and no sports really happening, so we can't talk about that. Me and Clay Baker are currently separated right now, so we can't really do real talk. So, just to get content out here, me and Mike Dompey kind of made the idea of making the show of me just sitting in front of my iPad camera and talking to you about sports. So that's what I'm going to do. So there is kind of a schedule to this. Every Tuesday, I'm going to release a longer video about sports. It's going to be pretty well researched. Looked into. There's going to be a certain topic that I'm going to set on a Wednesday, and then I'm going to kind of work the whole week on it, and then upload a video on Tuesday. And then there will be 2 episodes during the week. One will be on a Thursday, and one will be on a Saturday. Those 2 episodes are kind of just going to be off the cuff. A little bit like First Take, where you kind of just see a story and you say the first thing you say about it. Say the first thing you think about it, and it will be, I'm well versed in sports, and I won't talk about anything I'm in the deep end in. So so just to put out content out there, talk about sports, get things off my chest. I love talking about sports, and the fact that it's not happening right now, it's really hard to do so, especially with the fact that the friends that you talk about with sports, we're not allowed to go and see them. So this is just a fun thing that I'm doing with this, and I hope you all enjoy it. So we're gonna get right into it. The big thing in the NBA right now that's been going around is the talk of the Chicago Bulls and the fact that they are finding new people to run their front office. It's nice that this is the only news in the NBA, and it just happens to be about my favorite team right here. This was what are the Bulls' 2011 playoff game with Rose, Boozer, and Noah. We got this flag. So yeah, love the Bulls. Been a big Bulls fan since Kirk Heinrich back in 06 and 07. My first sports jersey was a Ben Wallace jersey. So I love the Bulls, and it's nice that it's not good news that they're repairing their front office, but it's nice news. It's nice that the only NBA news kind of has to circulate around them, and I get to, something that involves me and my fandom. But the thing about the Bulls is that this comes at a really troubling time, because the Bulls started a rebuild in I think you would label it as 2016, but it was the 2016-27 season. So they started a rebuild 3 years ago, and they are in the middle of that rebuild right now. And now they are getting new management. They're getting new people to run their team. And that's never a good sign. That's never good. I mean, typically when you get new management, that means you're starting a new rebuild, right? And typically rebuilds take about 5 years, right? So it's a little... So the Bulls still got 2 years technically, right? You typically put a 5-year clock on a rebuild. And if you're not where you want to be at the end of those 5 years, right, then you start over, right? You typically start over, or you put even more money into what you're doing, right? So they're 3 years in, and they're getting new management. So I don't really know that much about NBA executives and who's good and who's bad. I never really heard of this. I don't know his first name, Karnisovas, who's the new VP of Executive Basketball Operations. I started researching this last Tuesday, and today, the day I'm recording it, Gar Forman got fired. Gar Forman has been a part of the Bulls organization for the last 22 years. I looked up on Google, and it said that in 2009 was when he was assigned to be the GM. Now, Gar Forman is the general manager. He got fired, but there's a two-headed monster that's running the Chicago Bulls, and it's Gar Forman and John Paxson. Paxson has not been fired yet. There have been rumors that if they do move on from him, he still will be in the front office. because Jerry Reinsdorf, who's owned the Bulls since 80. I didn't look that up. 86 maybe? I don't know. He was all the way through he was through the Jordan era. He went through the mediocre Kirk Heinrich era, and Derrick Rose, and now whatever era you call this, the era of not being that good. So Jerry's been has been the owner for the Bulls for a long time. Paxson and Foreman have been atop of the Bulls for a long time, making decisions, and now the Bulls are finally moving on from that. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna walk through the rebuild, right? We're gonna walk through how it started, their mistakes, the good things that they did, and where they are now. And we're kind of gonna run through. Now we're not gonna run through every trade and every free agent signing. The reason being is there are stages to rebuilding, right? And this is pretty evident throughout all sports, right? When you first decide you have a rebuild, you have to look at your assets that you have right now, right? And you trade those assets that you have that they're not going to be a part of the rebuild, right? If you win a title in 5 years, these assets that you have now aren't going to be with you when you do it, right? So you sell those assets for new, young, developing talent, younger assets that you hope one day will develop into players that are better than that person that you traded, or pieces that will help you win a championship, right? After that, you break everything down, right? You clear cap space, you get rid of guys who are taking up a lot of cap. That's easier said than done, but you try to make as much money as possible available to you for free agency, so when you get to the point where you think you can sign some veterans and compete, you have that money to spend. That's second. You break down, and the breaking down and moving of the money is second, and the signing is fourth. And the third thing that you do is just experiment. You're just constantly just getting guys who, shown potential in the past, and maybe they didn't have the right situation, right, from their previous team, or you got guys who, were really good at they weren't in Power 5 conferences in basketball, so you take flyers on those guys. Or maybe you got a guy like Ryan Arcidiacono, right? He was a G leaguer, right? And they took a chance on him because he was really good at Villanova, but he wasn't the star, right? So it's constantly experimenting, constantly cashing in older guys for guys that maybe that you really hope will be a part of that team that you want to contend with, right? So we'll start from the top. We'll start from the trading of assets, right? So the rebuild started in 2016, the 2016-2017 season. So in the 2015-2016 season, here's the 2016 Bulls roster. The Bulls had Jimmy Butler, Nikola Mirotic, Michael Carter-Williams, Cristiano Felicio, Taj Gibson, Doug McDermott, Robin Lopez, Bobby Portis, Rajon Rondo, Dwayne Wade, Denzel Valentine, and Paul Zipser. So this team was 41-41. They were the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. They lost in the first round to the Boston Celtics 6 games. At one point, they were up 2-0 against the Boston Celtics. Rajon Rondo got injured. They lost the next 4 games. I followed this team a lot because, there was a lot of excitement around this team. I mean, they signed Dwayne Wade, a hometown kid, well, not really a kid, but a hometown hero to many, came to Chicago to play for the Bulls. He teamed up with Jimmy Butler, who at the time was an all-star. He still is an all-star, who was just reaching his prime. He was 28 years old during this season. And they signed Rajon Rondo, who's at one point a perennial all-star point guard, labeled as one of the top 5 point guards in the league. So there was some decent excitement around this team, and it was a really up and down season. They went off to a really good start. They struggled in the middle, and then they just got to that 8th seed. During this time, a big move that they did made, which you can tell that they were like this the whole season, is they traded Taj Gibson, who was an expiring contract, and Doug McDermott. This was a salary dump. They knew they weren't going to get Taj back. They got Cameron Payne, Joffrey Laverne, and a second-round pick, or they traded a second-round pick which became Mitchell Robinson, who's a really good center. So Bulls kind of miss out on that a little bit, but who's to say they would have taken him? But that's just something to note there. So they finished the season, right? They're 41-41, and they're kind of at a point where they're looking at the roster, and Dwayne Wade is getting older, and he's eating up a lot of cap space. Jimmy is coming close to the end of his contract, right? He's 2 years out from being an unrestricted free agent. And you're looking up and down the roster, you spent a lot of money on Nikola Mirotic, you spent money on Jimmy, you spent money on Dwayne. They don't really have a lot of cap space, so they decide that they're going to rebuild. They don't think they can get better than 41-41 in the next season, which is a good decision because they weren't going to get any better. Dwayne was getting older and, was regressing pretty drastically. And you didn't want to waste the best years of Jimmy Butler's career in Chicago and not get anything out of it. So the first thing that they do in the start of the 2017 season, or the 2017-2018 season, is they traded Jimmy Butler for Chris Dunn, Lauri Markkanen, and Zach LaVine. At that point, the trade was looked at as the Timberwolves had won. Right? You look at the trade, you had a 28-year-old Jimmy Butler, who was in his prime, a perennial all-star. You're sending him to Minnesota with Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, right? And Karl Anthony Towns is looked at to be a future superstar. Wiggins, I mean, he took a big downfall from them, but there was a point where people thought that Andrew Wiggins was going to be a top 5 player in the league. Even at that point, I know the hype wasn't top 5, but he was going to be pretty darn good, right? And you're pairing him up. Now you got a winner, right? Because Jimmy is a hard-nosed player. You paired him up with Tom Thibodeau. He had the best years of the careers with Tom Thibodeau, who's now in Minnesota, right? So when you got a guy in Jimmy Butler who can close out games, he's a veteran. He's been to the Western Conference, the Eastern Conference Finals. He's been to the playoffs. You're giving the Timberwolves someone that is very valuable. And what do they have to give up? Well, they gave up Zach LaVine, who was a 20-point scorer, who also was a third option on that team, was scoring 20 points per game, but he tore his ACL mid-season, right? You also gave up Chris Dunn, who was a good point guard, but he just wasn't really getting the minutes that he needed during the season. It was a constant competition between him and Tyus. I don't know if Tyus Jones was on the roster then. It might have been Teague was there, but he wasn't getting the minutes. He thought he didn't have a great rookie season, so they traded him away. His value was increasing, and they gave up the number 7 pick. Number 7 pick was Lauri Markkanen. At the time, Lauri Markkanen's, when you have the 7th pick, and this is going to be a very common theme for the Chicago Bulls because they had the 7th pick in this draft, and the next draft they had the 7th pick, and the next draft after that they had the 7th pick. You're typically drafting guys with higher floors and lower ceilings, right? Guys who are probably, in terms of playing, top 3, top 4, right? In terms of right now, Kobe White was probably a top 3 right now player in his draft, but his potential wasn't as high as a Cam Reddish or DeAndre Hunter or, Barrett, John, Zion were all better than Kobe. But Kobe was really good, but his ceiling isn't that high. So you're looking at a high floor, low ceiling guy, or you're looking at a project. You're looking at a guy who, he's an interesting looking prospect, but you don't know if his game is going to translate correctly onto the basketball court. Lauri's both, which is a little weird. I mean, he's 7 foot and he was 220 pounds coming into the league. He's a power forward who shoots threes, right? He's a really good lights out shooter. People didn't think Lauri was going to be a star. I'm not saying he is a star. He definitely has that potential now. You could label Lauri Markkanen as a future star in the NBA, but a lot of people just didn't like the pick. And there's not a lot you can do with the 7th pick because you have to realize that there are 60 picks, right, in the NBA draft every year, okay? And in every draft class, other than there are a couple here and there where there is an exception, there's only really 3 all-stars, right? And there's only a handful of starters, right? So when you're trading a guy like Jimmy Butler, who's a perennial all-star, a top 15 player in the league, you should be getting something of that in return. And they got a Zach LaVine who had a torn ACL, Zach LaVine, so that's a big question mark. They got a former top pick in Chris Dunn who didn't have a good rookie season, and they had a Lauri Markkanen who is a question mark. He's not a great athlete, but he's a good shooter. He's a center, but he's not strong. It's a plus and minus with Lauri Markkanen, right? Because stretch fives, I mean, when you draft a stretch five in a draft, it's always looked at as skeptical because he's 7-footer, but he can't defend in the post, right? And he's a 7-footer, but he's shooting threes. So he's a bit of he's a less athletic Kristaps Porzingis, right? And Kristaps Porzingis wasn't Kristaps Porzingis when he got drafted, right? Everyone hated that pick. So when the trade was made at the time, it looked like the Bulls got fleeced. Now, when you look at the pick, Jimmy Butler had 1.5 seasons in Minnesota that ended terribly, right? He ended up hating Cat and Andrew Wiggins, right? It was an awful situation for the Timberwolves. They were the 3 seed, then he got injured. They were then the 8th seed. He then went into practice saying that Wiggins is soft and telling the general manager that they needed him and was swearing at everybody and was just a bit of a I'm not going to call Jimmy a cancer, but he was definitely tough on a lot of guys in the Minnesota Timberwolves locker room, and they didn't really like that. So then he got traded to Philadelphia a year and a half later after being traded for, and now he's with the Miami Heat. Lauri Markkanen right now is looked at as a future star in the league. At least he was until he took a step back this year. We'll get into that in a little bit. Zach LaVine is literally the closest thing you can get to not being an all-star. Like, he's not an all-star, but he's an all-star. He wasn't voted to that team, but he's a top 25 player in the league, definitely. Top 30, at least. And you could probably put a star, not superstar, but you could probably put the star, symbol next to Zach LaVine, right? So, they had one asset. And the Bulls traded that away. And they got what looks like now to be... They won that trade. And it's not necessarily because Zach, Lauri, and Chris are amazing now. I mean, they are really good, but what do the Timberwolves have, right? What do they get out of Jimmy? Really? Robert Covington? Dario Saric? I mean, those are good players, right? But are they, would they want to have... Would you take Robert Covington and Dario Saric over Markkanen, Dunn, and LaVine? I wouldn't, So they got their assets, right, from they traded their asset and they got future assets, right? Now they cleared space. They waived Dwayne Wade. They got rid of the $26 million price tag next to him. They released Rajon Rondo. They had a guy named Isaiah Cannon that released him, right? So they're getting rid of cap space. They're clearing it out, and then they make their first mistake. They signed Cristiano Felicio to a 4-year, $32 million deal. Cristiano Felicio is a 6'11" traffic cone. He's a bigger guy. He's immobile. He sits on the bench a lot. I mean, I don't think Cristiano Felicio would play on another NBA team. And this was during the time of when, I don't know if people remember this, but the salary cap went up, right? The salary cap went up, the luxury tax went up, so teams were just spending money like it was nothing, just on guys who really didn't deserve it. And Cristiano Felicio was one of those dudes who lucked into that season where it was the knee-jerk reaction to the fact that the salary cap went up, so teams had more money to spend. And he was the benefit of that, and he got four-year, $32 million deal. This is a mistake because he's not good. If the Bulls weren't so injury-prone, he wouldn't get this much money. Also, I think the best example is the fact that the Bulls had $24 million in cap space around there. I think it was 24 to $26 million in cap space that they had this year to sign free agents. The difference between that, right, and $8 million is a lot. Because the difference between $26 million and $34 million is the difference between 2 good players and 1 all-star, right? You look at the guys, especially in this offseason, right? You had D'Angelo Russell, Kawhi Leonard. You had Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. Not that the Bulls would have signed any of these guys, right? But you look at where the Bulls were this offseason. You had Lauri Markkanen and Zach LaVine, right? You had 2 future franchise pieces. What you were looking for was another all-star to go with Zach LaVine if you wanted to compete this year. And even if you didn't want to compete this year, if you're signing a max guy to a long-term contract, you're in the long haul. So you're going to be able to compete for a couple of years, right? I'm not saying that the Bulls would have signed any big free agents if they had that money, but it's nice just to have that money. It's nice just to say, hey, D'Angelo, instead of going all the way to Golden State, where, I know you want to be with Curry and Clay, who Clay was injured and Curry got injured as well. And it didn't work out well because he ended up getting traded. How about you have a team with Zach LaVine? How about you lead a young core, right? They weren't able to do that because of Cristiano Felicio's $8 million. Which hindsight, that cost him a bit. And who's to say that, those free agents that they were vying to get wouldn't have signed. Also, when you have $34 million, you're more inclined to split up more money between 2 free agents, right? So they had we'll split it. We'll say they had $25 million. It was somewhere between 24 and 26. They had that, right? And they spent $10 million on Thomas Satoransky, and they spent $12 million on Thaddeus Young. What they could have done is spent $24 million on a Malcolm Brogdon or $24 million on a Bojan Bogdanovic, guys who are going to give, on championship teams, would give phenomenal minutes. Well, they'd be starters. Those 2 are starters anywhere. So you got 2 great starters, 2 really good players, right, that you're adding to your team. And then you could have probably signed a guy like Satoransky, or signed maybe like a Jared Dudley or a JaVale McGee, or lower signings like that, or maybe just smaller, just increasing the level of players that you're getting. But because of this deal, they were not able to do it. They signed Justin Holiday. Justin Holiday was a fine player, but the reason why I'm bringing him up, he's no longer on the roster, is because he was salary dumped later for a second-round pick that I believe became... One of these guys was picked up and traded for something important. Yeah, okay. So he was actually traded for a second-round pick that would become important now, but we'll get to that in a bit. So, if we want to recap, the Bulls traded Butler for LaVine, Markkanen, and Dunn. They won that trade. They made a mistake, and they signed Cristiano Felicio to a 4-year, $32 million deal. Just to remind everybody, Fred Hoiberg is the coach of this team. That's a mistake in itself, but that didn't really happen during the rebuild, so we can't really call it a mistake. It will come back in the future. Okay, so, where are we? Okay, so then, 2017-2018 season starts. One of my favorite all-time Chicago Bulls stories happens. Nikola Mirotic and Bobby Portis get into a scuffle. Bobby Portis punches Nikola Mirotic in the face. Mirotic is out for 6 weeks. Mirotic comes back, and the Bulls, he goes crazy. He goes insane. He was a 20-point-per-game scorer. He was playing the best basketball of his life. He looked like the MVP from Spain that the Bulls had signed him in 2014 to be. And the Bulls went like 12-8 or 14. They went on a great run, and the management was like, we're winning too many games. We got to trade Mirotic. So the Bulls trade Mirotic, and they end up getting her. So I wrote down here exactly what they got for him. Okay, so they got him for some salary dumps and a first-round pick, which is trade a guy mid-season for a first-round pick is phenomenal, right? They traded into the Pelicans, who at the time had Anthony Davis and Marcus Cousins, so adding Mirotic was a good add for them. They traded a first-round pick for that, who ended up being Chandler Hutchison, who is, unless he breaks out, which I don't know if he will under this system. I don't think anyone will break out under this system under Jim Boylan. But I think at best, when you look at Hutchison, you look at a guy who can come off the bench and who can give you really good minutes on a really good championship caliber team. That's what he's looking to be. He could be. Role players are huge, right, in the NBA. They are ginormous. I mean, you look at that 2015 Golden State Warriors roster. I mean, they were really, really deep with Sean Livingston, Maurice Spates, Andre Iguodala was coming off of the bench, Andrew Bogut. I mean, that team was really, really deep. So it matters. It matters to have depth on your bench. I mean, look at the LA Clippers. They've been stocking on depth. And that's really, I'm surprised I haven't brought up the Clippers a little bit more in this video about rebuilds, because that is how you rebuild. What they did is how you rebuild. Now, they had more assets to go off of with Griffin and Paul and DeAndre Jordan, but that team knows how to rebuild, and they are phenomenal at it. Jerry West is the best executive to ever do it. I was planning on commenting on them more, but I guess I kind of blew past those points. So anyway, they traded Hutchison. They traded for Hutchison. Well, the first pick, who was Hutchison, right? So then they end up going 27 and 55. The first year of a rebuild is always the easiest because you expect to be bad. But then, I am going to bring up the Clippers here. But then a franchise sets its own expectations, right? They don't go out and tell you what they want to do or what they're looking to do. Not always. I mean, they're saying we want to contend or we want to do this, right? They're not going to tell you we plan to go on 47 and 35 and be the 6th seed, right? They don't say that. But by what they do during a season, they set their own expectations. And when you trade away your best player, right, and you draft a new guy and you're having all these new players come in, you're setting the expectation of, hey, we're trying something new, we're going to be bad. So no one really cares, right? They're like, oh, we're 27-55, doesn't really matter. We'll move on. Laurie looks good. Zach came back from his ACL injury, played all 24 games that he came back. He looked fine. Dunn had some really good minutes. You know what? It's looking up. And now we have the 7th pick in the draft. Wendell Carter Jr. looks really good, right? And Chandler Hutchison, he was a first-round pick, so maybe he'll be there. So you're thinking for the Bulls, the Bulls they're riding high. They're riding a little bit too high here, right? And they are going to set their expectations way over what they should be, right? And it's going to cost them the entire rebuild. This next move and what they do is going to cost them everything, right? So, like I said, you set your own expectations as a franchise. And if the Bulls just held their money and said, you know what, we're gonna re-sign the guys like Shaq Harrison. They did re-sign Shaq Harrison. They had Ryan Arcidiacono. They said he's going to be a part of the lineup going. He was on that team in the last year, but he was up and down. He also looked kind of promising in the games that he played, and they still had Robin Lopez and Bobby Portis was still there. So if the Bulls were like, we're going to save our money and we're going to try to develop this talent and we're not going to set any expectations, they would have been okay, right? They don't, right? So the Bulls are like, you know what? We think we have a really promising team. We want to add a piece to that. We're going to sign Jabari Parker for 2 years, $40 million. Big mistake. This literally goes on to ruin everything. This ruins the entire rebuild. Now, why do they do it? Why did they sign Jabari Parker? Well, the first reason is because Jabari Parker at one point in his second or third year in the NBA, well, when he was drafted, everyone thought he was going to be a star, right? And then his second or third year in the NBA, he looked like he was rising. He was averaging 20 points per game. The Bucks looked at their roster and said, wow, there's Giannis and there's Jabari. we got to pick between two, there were some executives who were leaning towards keeping Jabari, extending Jabari, and then when the time came to just let Giannis go, and they were really fearing that decision, and then Jabari Parker tears his ACL, right? A Chicago kid who lived in Chicago, played high school basketball in Chicago, went to Duke, tears his ACL in the NBA. Now, except for the Duke part, that sounds like a familiar story to many people. So he tears his ACL. He's a shell of his former self. He's averaging 15 points per game. He's a free agent because the Bucks are like, no way are we picking this guy over Giannis, and he's wanting too much money. We paid him $40 million, right? So the Bulls are like, you know what? Maybe we can have Jabari be the guy that he was supposed to be, give him a fresh start, give him money. He's a hometown. People will love this. I loved it. Jabari's from Chicago. I saw him play Notre Dame. I watched it. I didn't go to the game, but I watched it, right? I mean, he's phenomenal, right? At least that's what Chicago people wanted him to be. So then they sign him, and it's just awful. I mean, he's not what he once was, and he's not going to be what he once was advertised to be. He's awful defensively, and this is going to be a theme. Because once the Bulls sign Jabari Parker, right, everyone's like, wow, we have LaVine, we have Market, and we have LaVine. He's going to come back. He looked healthy. He'll come back better. Markkanen's only going to bet better. By the way, Markkanen goes and scores 19 points and 10 rebounds a game during this time, so he's pretty legit, right? So LaVine's great. Markkanen's great. Hopefully Chris Dunn, who got injured, which will become a common theme for Chris Dunn and Chris Dunn and this entire Bulls roster, right? Hopefully he'll stay healthy, and you know what? We can make a playoff push. Robin Lopez is good, and Wendell. We just got Wendell Carter Jr., right? Who's going to anchor our defense. I mean, this team could go and they could make the playoffs. So people start watching the games, and they realize that no one on that team can play defense except for Wendell Carter Jr., who's a rookie in the NBA. So they go 22-60. During this time, Fred Hoiberg is fired, which is a good decision to fire Hoiberg because he's not a good coach. They make an even bigger mistake on promoting Jim Boylan and then giving him an extension in the offseason, right, to be their head coach. I'm not even done with Jabari, and we're just getting started on Jim Boylan, because Jim Boylan is the coach. He comes in, and he's a hard-nosed defensive guy. He's all about defense and effort, grit, grind. That's why he loves Ryan Arcidiacono, right? It's just all about hustle, right? So he says, you know what? I want to trade Jabari Parker. Let's get rid of his contract. And they're like, okay. And he's like, you know what? Bobby Portis is awful at defense. I don't want him on my team either. And they're like, okay, we'll trade him for Otto Porter Jr. Otto Porter Jr. led the NBA at one point in three-point percentage this year. Really good player, right? He's a really good player. The problem is that Otto Porter Jr. is getting paid $27 million this year, and he will get paid $28 million next year. Otto Porter, on like a Los Angeles Lakers team, would be like a sixth man. On the Clippers, he would be the sixth man, or seventh man. No better sixth man than Lou Williams. Who'll be the seventh man? They'd be like, wow, Otto Porter's a good player. He's really great off the bench. Everything that he's good at that makes him valuable is completely negated from the fact that the Bulls have to pay him $27 million. That you think that Cristiano Felicio's $8 million killed the Bulls in free agency? How about Otto Porter Jr.'s, who at best is a starter, he's a good starter. Now, 12 games he played for the Bulls, he was getting 35 minutes a game, right? 17.5 points per game. He's a guy that you look at and you're like, oh, he's good, right? And he could be a part of the playoff team. But the problem is we're paying $27 million. So, is he a good player? Yes. Is he worth the $27 million? No. Also, can Otto Porter play defense? No, he cannot. So it's a train wreck. It's a train wreck. They go out and they spend money on a guy that they're really excited about. They set the expectations of, hey, we have a really good future. We could make the playoffs this year. They go 5-19 to begin the season. They fire their head coach. They hire a lunatic of a new head coach who pissed the players off so much that they had a team meeting because Boylan was making them do push-ups and suicides. He wasn't saying, hey guys, this is my new defensive system and this is my new offensive system. If we want to win games, we should kind of learn that pretty quickly because that's going to be important to winning some basketball games. No, he said, get on the line and run back and forth and do some push-ups. And that, everyone was like, we're in the NBA. We're not in high school. Somehow, Gar Forman and John Paxson at the end of the season say, you know what? We like what Jim did with the team, so we're going to keep him. It's just crazy. It's just bad. It's just bad general managing. Now, during this time, while this was all happening, they were dumping a lot of salary. They traded Justin Holiday for a second-round pick and some cash. They traded a second-round pick for Michael Carter-Williams and cash. They released Michael Carter-Williams later. They traded a G-Leaguer for Melo and cash. They got rid of Melo, so they were just getting rid of a bunch of cash because they knew that they were going to be in a pretty dire situation for cash in the future. These were all good moves because it let them sign who they ended up signing this year. So the Bulls now are 22-60. Now, say what you want to say about Jabari and Otto Porter, like I just did. But when you look at the core of the Bulls, who right now with Zach LaVine and Lauri Markkanen, you look at those two guys and you say, okay, those are the pillars. Zach scored 23 points per game, and Lauri went 18-9. Phenomenal numbers for Lauri in his second season. Zach looks like he is fully recovered from his ACL tear, right? And it won't be we're assuming it won't bother him in the future. I mean, when Derrick Rose came back from his ACL, he wasn't the same. And he never looked the same. Zach LaVine looked better than what he did after he tore his ACL. So there's a lot of hope. You look at the roster and you say, okay, we're losing Robin Lopez. That's fine. That's money that we don't need anymore. Shaq Harrison, will lose him too. We still got Lauri, LaVine, Dunn, who got injured again. But when he plays, Dunn looks good, right? So you're hoping that he continues to be good but stays healthy. Wendell Carter Jr., who played 44 games that season, but when he did play his games, was a 10-8 guy, who for a 6'9" power forward, that's really good. You only think he's going to get better. And Otto Porter Jr. is a solid. Now, like we said, he's a really good player. He's not really good. He's a good player. But the fact you're paying $27 million kind of just puts a really big asterisk right on him. But he's still good. So you're looking at a lineup of, you need a point guard, right? But you got Zach LaVine, Otto Porter. You'd have to put Wendell at the 4 and Lauri at the 5. If this was the 90s, Lauri would get destroyed. It's not, because teams don't really run their offense through the post. If they run their offense through the center, they typically start outside to in. They really don't run the offense through the center anymore. I mean, the guy that you can look at the best is probably Anthony Davis, and he plays the 4 mainly. He plays the power forward position with the Lakers. And even when he is handling the ball, he really doesn't start in the post that whole often. So Lauri's only downside is on the defensive end. So, but it's phenomenal that when you look at their two pillars, you have a go get us a bucket scorer in Zach LaVine at the shooting guard, and you have a complementary piece who can shoot the lights out at the center. Those are perfect. You got guys on the opposite wings, right, who can feed off of each other. They've been feeding off of each other for the last few years. It's a very complementary tandem that they have, right? And you look at Otto Porter Jr., he's, like we said, good player, right? Small forward position. You got Wendell Carter, who's really good defensively, has to stay healthy, but there is some potential in him, right? And then you look at the bench. Well, the bench is Ryan Arcidiacono and Chris Dunn. So, you got a couple options here. First, you got to get more bench pieces. So you can have 2 point guards on the bench. Dunn is athletic, and Diacono is athletic enough where they can play the 2. They're not really shooters, but they can play it. You got to sign people, right? You need a power forward who can play games, and when you're looking down that roster, okay, you got Felicio who can back up the center, but you're probably gonna need a backup center. Small forward, it'd be nice to get a backup small forward, but you do have Denzel Valentine on that roster as well. So when you go up and down the list, Felicio is going to have to play minutes, even though he's not great, unless you sign a center. But they only have $24 million, and they're not going to draft a center because they just drafted one last year. So backup center would be nice. Backup small forward would be a luxury, but you have Denzel Valentine, so I guess they're going to keep it, right? And you got Diacono and Dunn. So you need a point guard unless you want to go with one of those two, and if you want to make the playoffs, because the Bulls are setting those expectations for themselves to make the playoffs, and I mean, fans are looking at the roster and says if they make the right moves, they can make the playoffs. So what should happen here is you should draft a point guard or you should draft a small forward. And then whatever positions you don't draft, you should sign, right? So the Bulls draft Kobe White. He's a guard. He can play point guard, 6'5". He's a scorer, right? He's a great playmaker, too. He's a playmaker, more of a scorer, but is a playmaker. He's a really good prospect, right? And if you give him the ball and you can put him next to Zach, Kobe's not as ball first as Zach is, right? If you tell Kobe you got to make plays on the court and you can't always take your shot, you can't always manufacture your own offense, you're going to have to give it to Zach a little bit, right? That'll work. And then you got a great complementary piece with Lauri, and then you have $26 million to go and get some supporting roles. So what you're doing there is in order to win a championship, you're going to hope that Kobe White and Zach LaVine become a great guard tandem, right? A little bit like McCollum and Lillard. And you're going to hope that Lauri keeps developing into the player that he can be, which in my estimations, in a lot of people's best mindset would be probably a 24 and 12 guy. Guy can go and score bucket, score 20-plus points a night and grab 12 rebounds. And then you have good supporting pieces around him. I know you're paying $27 million for Otto Porter, right? And it's bad, but he's still a good supporting piece. And then whatever pieces you sign, right, that's going to help you. So they're building, they're slowly building, they have an opportunity this offseason, even though all the mistakes that they have made, to put themselves in a position in the future to contend, right? And they'll have to retool and make some minor moves to open up some cap space and get more players and draft well too, because you always have to draft well, but they've put themselves in a position to do that. And they don't, right? Well, they don't execute. To begin with, they re-signed Jim Boylan, which is a big mistake. Because even though you're bad on defense, right, and you think you need a defensive coach, Lauri Markkanen isn't the guy that you can give the ball to him and say, all right, Lauri, go and get yourself 20. He's not athletic enough where you can do that. He's not like Anthony Davis where you can give him the ball and he can go, right? So you need an offensive coach. You need just a coach who's going to put him in the right offensive system and that trust in Lauri. Jim Boylan's offensive systems are awful. His rotations, by the way, we're not even going to have time to cover his rotations, but his rotations are horrendous, right? I mean, countless amount of times that the Bulls have been up by 5 or down by 5 with 5 minutes left, and Zach LaVine isn't even in the game, right? But anyway, we're not going to comment at that. Lauri's growth is going to get stunted because Jim Boylan is an awful coach, especially on the offensive end. Now, defensively, the Bulls were 12th this year until the season got postponed. Hopefully not canceled. It's postponed right now. I don't think it'll get canceled, by the way. I think Adam Silver is too adamant on playing this season to cancel it. But anyway, Lauri's growth is going to stunt because of Jim Boylan. I mean, I knew it going into the season. He's just not the right coach for Lauri. And frankly, he's really not the right coach for anybody. He doesn't really stunt Zach's growth because of the fact that Zach is a go-get-him scorer. You don't really need to make offensive systems around Zach unless you're just saying, Zach, you can't have the ball because Zach needs the ball to score, right? But that's their first mistake. Their second mistake is they draft Kobe White, which is great, but instead of telling him that he's a playmaker, they say, you're the backup shooting guard, and when Zach comes out, we're going to give you the ball and you're going to go and score. I'm not really opposed to Here's why I'm opposed to this. Fine. You want to do that with Kobe, but you're developing him in the wrong way. Kobe, in order for the Bulls to win, Kobe needs to be great, but he needs to be a playmaker. You're developing him into a scorer. Ever heard of Steve Francis and Stephon Marbury? Those were two score first, need the ball in my hand to score type of guys. They were in New York. They were both all-stars at one point. It was awful as a Knicks. Well, I'm not a Knicks fan, but Knicks fans hated watching them because they couldn't coexist with one another. You want to see coexistence on the court between two guards? Watch the Trailblazers play. McCollum and Lillard are both great players, and they can coexist on the court together because McCollum is more of a spot-up shooter and it's a little both, right? McCollum doesn't need the ball as much as Lillard does, right? Now, it's the switch of the positions because McCollum's a shooting guard and Lillard's the point guard, but you can flip-flop that, right? McCollum scores, right? But he doesn't need the ball as much as Lillard. Kobe can score. He doesn't need the ball as much as LaVine. But because you were telling Kobe that you were a shooting guard, you're developing him in the wrong way, and when you draft a first-round pick, especially a top 10 pick, you're expecting him to be a part of your championship team, of your championship starting five. At least those should be the expectations. And to be honest with you, with the moves that they're making, I don't know if the Bulls are really trying to win a championship, right? When you look at it, you draft the 7th pick, put him at the point guard position because your franchise player is already shooting guard. But no, they put him on the bench and they tell him that, look, you're a shooting guard, and then they don't sign a center. They decide we're going to play Cristiano Felicio, the 6'11", I think he's close. I think he's 7. We'll just call him the 7-foot traffic cone, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to sign a point guard. They signed Thomas Satoransky. Why? You draft a point guard. You draft a guard who should be your point guard. They decide to move him to the shooting guard position for a backup shooting guard. By the way, I forgot to mention this. They don't really need a small forward would have helped, right? Because if you draft a small forward and you develop him into a starter, you can get rid of Otto Porter easily, right, in his big contract. But they also have Chandler Hutchison. I forgot about Chandler Hutchison. So they didn't need a small forward, but a small forward would have been nice. What you really were looking for was a power forward and a point guard. And they did get a power forward and a point guard. But the thing is that when you get Kobe, you can put Kobe at the 1, and if you really want to compete for a playoff spot, you don't need to get another guard. Because think about it, right? You have Thomas Satoransky, Ryan Arcidiacono, Chris Dunn, and now Kobe White. You have 4 guards vying for one starting position. And if you're saying that Kobe is going to be your shooting guard, your backup shooting guard, well, then you have 3 guys playing at one point guard position. And by the way, Boylan does this, but it's so dumb. He puts Arcidiacono and Dunn on the court at the same time. They are the same players. They are both defensive. They are both defensive point guards who can't shoot the ball that well. They're more of slashers, but their use is on the defensive end and moving the ball. You can't do that, okay? And it just doesn't. That's why they lose these games, because their rotations are bad because they have the wrong personnel on the floor. When you draft Kobe White, he played point guard at North Carolina. Put him at the point guard position. But no, they want to put him at the shooting guard position. Now, they signed Thomas Satoransky, who is a good player. And even though it's not even against the fact that they signed Thomas Satoransky, I'm against the fact that they signed another point guard. They signed Thaddeus Young. You know what? That was a great signing. Thaddeus Young played 70 games for the Indiana Pacers. We haven't even gotten to the fact that, Laurie played only 52 games, Chris Dunn played 50 games, and Wendell Carter played 40 games the year before, right? So they get some stability, right, in terms of a non-injury prone player at the power forward position, which is needed. They also signed Luke Cornett, so they're limiting the minutes with Cristiano Felicio, which is nice. So Cornett was a good signing. Young was a good signing. They signed Satoransky and they don't trade Dunn, and then they get another point guard. So, and look at it from so many different ways, right? It doesn't matter who you start at the point guard position, right? For this point, because okay, fine, you start Satoransky. Your 6, 7, and 8 guys are all guards. Dunn, Diacono, Kobe White, right? You have 5 out of your a team. So like the Lakers, they play 9 guys, right? So the Bulls have 5 guards on their team. They have 5, let alone the 4 other positions and their backups, or the 3 other positions, the forwards / center, and their backups. It's ludicrous how many guards they have, and they keep spending money on them. And Kobe White is a draft pick, but it's not like he's cheap. You're still spending $7 million on him, right? It's ridiculous. It was just so dumb watching it happen, right? Because everyone said going in the draft that the Bulls should get a point guard, and if they don't get a point guard, well, you know what? Maybe they fall into Jarrett Culver, or maybe DeAndre Hunter is there, or maybe they get Cam Reddish at 7, or they could trade back with Atlanta, switch with Atlanta. Maybe Atlanta takes whoever, and they get Cam Reddish, right? So get a point guard, get a small forward, right? The Bulls drafted a shooting guard. Well, they drafted a point guard and made him a shooting guard while their franchise player is a shooting guard. And they're developing Kobe White into a ball-first guard while they already have Zach LaVine, who is a ball-first guard. It's those 2 decisions. Jabari, who led into Otto Porter, who's leading into eating up $27 million of cap space for being an average starter. And it's the fact you drafted a point guard and you made him your backup shooting guard when your franchise player is already a shooting guard. That's the problem. The Bulls have no cap space anymore along with that, because they spent all of it this season. Before the season got canceled, they're 22-43. Laurie looks like has taken a step back because of Boylan. Wendell also looks good, but he looks good. He looks good. Thaddeus Young has been okay. If they paid him more than $12 million, I'd say he's been underperforming, but $12 million seemed like the right amount for him. He's a 10-6 guy. Good bench piece. Hopefully future bench piece. Luke Cornett was a good signing. He shoots the ball too much. He won't be on the team next year. At least I hope he's not on the team next year, because that means things have gone wrong. But it's just a mess. It's a mess now. It's a mess because Laurie's taking a step back because of Jim Boylan, and they're not developing Kobe White in the right way, at least a sustainable way. You can't tell it now because him and Zach are rarely on the floor together, right? Because he comes off the bench. But if they keep developing the way he is, it's going to be a dumpster fire watching the Bulls play when Kobe White and Zach LaVine are both hogging to score the ball, right? If they keep doing this with him, which I hope I hope they stop, right? Yeah. I'm just getting mad thinking about it. It's a really bad situation, and I'm glad they got new people under control to fix it. Now, who's to blame? Obviously, guard Paxton Foreman. Who's really to blame? Jerry Reinsdorf. Gar Foreman and John Paxson have been at helm for so long, and they've just it was even before they just keep making mistake after mistake after mistake, and after 6 years of Foreman was there for 22 years, and he after Jordan left, he never did anything. Neither did Paxson. They've been there for too long, but those are Jerry's guys. Even though they haven't won a championship, they were at helm for so long because they were Jerry's guys. And Jim Boylan is still the coach of this team, and he's been the assistant coach since 2006 because he's Jerry's guy. Notice a trend here? The people who are stunning this rebuild, right, and who are completely flipping it and just making it worse and worse and worse are Jerry's guys. I'm sorry, but this is a business. Basketball, the NBA, is a business. And maybe loyalty isn't always the best business. Loyalty is great. It's great. If you're a loyal person, you earn a lot of respect, right? But does loyalty always win games? Well, let's flip through the script here. I mean, no, they don't. It's 41 wins, 27 wins, 22 wins. They're 22 and 43 now. They probably win about 25 games, which is or 26. Maybe they get to 27, and the fact that they're maybe get to 27 wins this year is pretty pathetic, considering the fact that they won 27 games in their first year of rebuilding when it seemed like they had completely stripped down the roster. I mean, minus Robin Lopez and Justin Holiday. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I'm glad it's very refreshing that they're going to put new people in charge. But the fact is that they have a lot of work to do. Now, what would I do? Well, first off, I mean, it starts with the draft. You got to get rid of Porter somehow. You somehow got to get rid of Otto Porter. You got to get rid of Dunn or Arcidiacono. I would get rid of Dunn because Arcidiacono is cheaper. You signed Daniel Gafford, and Daniel Gafford ain't that bad. He's not that bad. Second round pick, he's actually not that bad. I'm not going to put my hope into him yet, but he is pretty good. Chandler Hutchison is okay. You'll keep him. I mean, you got a roster that you're going to keep intact, and Zach is still there for 2 more years. Lowry has 2 more years until you have to pay him. So the first thing you got to do is you got to get rid of Otto and then work from there. Maybe get rid of Satoransky too. I mean, I would just commit to a Kobe, Zach, for now, Otto, Lowry, Wendell lineup. Get rid of Satoransky with either Dunn or Arcidiacono. Just have one backup point guard. And draft another guard or small forward. That's what I'm looking at. Now, the Wolves are going to have a lottery pick this year, obviously. You know what? I have hope that they'll get a top pick. It's been a while. It's been a long time since they've gotten top 5 picks, so I will hold out hope that they will get one. If they do, it's a really deep draft class. One guy that I really want on the Bulls, and this isn't me being like, oh, I watch high school basketball and I'm really cool because I watched it for a long time. LaMelo Ball. And the reason is because if you get LaMelo Ball, putting Kobe at the backup shooting guard makes sense. Because I think that you can make sense out of putting Kobe at the backup shooting guard, which I think that I don't think they're going to change that. Oh, I would fire Boylan right away and hire someone with a brain. But LaMelo Ball, he just makes the most sense. He's a pure, because Kobe, you can develop Kobe into a playmaker, but he still is a scorer. At heart, he's a scorer. So LaMelo Ball, I think, would fit perfectly into this roster, but they're going to need to luck into a top 3 pick. If they get one, which I don't think they will, it'll be DeAndre Hunter. Or what would make sense as well is Wiseman, but they need to get a top 3 pick for that to happen. I think if they get a 4th pick, they could luck into LaMelo Ball. So I'm wishfully thinking, but realistically, if they do get a pick like that at 4, they could take Ball. Because I don't know, it's like you put Kobe, is he a backup shooting guard now? I feel like you drafted him because you needed a need at the point guard, and now he's a backup shooting guard. So if you draft Ball, who's a pure point guard, then you make, because now look, right now, Kobe is the most valuable as a point guard. He would be most valuable as the starting point guard. But if you get a guy like LaMelo Ball, who's a pure playmaking point guard, who's going to right off the bat average 9 assists a game in the NBA as a 19-year-old, then he's more valuable as the backup shooting guard. So, for me, even though I trash Kobe White being a backup shooting guard, it only makes sense if they get LaMelo Ball, and that's a big if. So, that's the only where I'll be like, you know what? Boylan's a genius because he knew he was going to get LaMelo Ball. Wink, wink. Wiseman would make a lot of sense, too. You would be, but at this point where you've been through so many drafts, you could look to just trade some of these guys, too. I mean, you could just trade Wendell, right? If you really want to go out and you want to trade, if you go out and get a top pick and you think you can compete now, you could trade a Wendell Carter, or you could trade Kobe, right? You can trade one or the other. So, I don't know. There are a lot of avenues to go through this. I'll look on the bright side, but nothing is going to get done. This will be my final point. Nothing will get done in Chicago for the Bulls unless 3 things happen. Gar Forman and John Paxson fired. One of those things have happened. Forman got fired, not Paxson. I think he won't get fired, but he won't be the general manager. So we say that happened. 2 is getting rid of Otto Porter's contract and making salary cap space. They might trade Thad Young. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. But they got to make space. And the third thing is, and I don't think this will happen, and I think it'll be a crime, you need to fire Boylan. Done. You need to fire Jim Boylan. That's my final thought. This is an hour video. It's about 20 minutes longer than I hoped it would go. Do I expect anyone to get to this point of the video? No, I really don't. I hope you guys enjoyed. That's my final thought. Episode 2 will be recorded tomorrow and then released on Thursday. I'll find something on wherever to talk about whatever and just kind of spew it out. I'll keep it under 20 minutes so people actually watch this videos all the way through. Episode 3 will come out, we'll do it a Saturday, and then next week, same thing, 45 minutes to an hour episode. I really appreciate you guys tuning in for this. I hope this was educational for you. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing this. And going over, hopefully, you guys were educated on basketball and rebuilding and the Bulls. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.